Hello and welcome to Sage Politics Webinar Week. Our webinar today is called Teaching Students to Do and Engage More Effectively with International Relations Theory, presented by authors Hubert Zimmermann and Alex Burkhardt of Philipps-University Marburg, Germany. My name is Fawzia Eastwood and I'm a marketing manager at Sage for the Politics Books portfolio. I'm a cisgender woman of South Asian background. I have medium-length brown hair and brown eyes and olive skin, and I'm wearing a red jumper. My pronouns are she, her. Before we start, I'd like to share some housekeeping webinar information. We're recording this webinar. However, we've switched off the cameras and muted the microphones for all participants except the presenters and hosts. This is so that everyone will be able to enjoy the session without background noise. The chat box won't be available for participants during this webinar. But if you do have questions, please write them in the Q&A box, and we'll reply to as many of those as we can during the session, with some answered live by the presenters too. And then we'll try to follow up with any that we didn't get around to answering today. So I would urge you to please take advantage of our presenters' expertise and focus any questions you may have around the content of today's webinar. As mentioned, we're recording the webinar and we'll upload the recorded video on Sage's YouTube channel over the coming weeks. We'll also share it via email and on our X page. We've made closed captions available during this webinar, so do switch those on if they're helpful for you. Sage is a global academic publisher of books, journals, and library resources with a growing range of technologies to enable discovery, access, and engagement. Our mission is building bridges to knowledge, supporting the development of ideas through the research process to scholarship that is certified, taught, and applied across all fields of social science. Whether you're preparing to teach a course, conducting research, or looking to publish your next research paper, our Sage Politics and International Relations portfolios provide top quality, easy to access materials to help you make the best use of your time and excel in your field. We're delighted to introduce today's webinar, which is on the theme of international relations theory, presented by authors Hubert Zimmermann and Alex Burkhardt. Their upcoming Sage textbook, co-authored with Milena Elsinger, is called International Relations Theories in Action. Comes out at the end of this month and will be referenced during this webinar. You can find out more about their book at our website, which you can see on the next slide. You can find out more about their book at our website, www.sagepub.co.uk, or if you scan the QR code you can see on the screen. And attendees of today's webinar can get a 25% discount using the code POLWebWeek, or if you're a lecturer, you can request an electronic inspection copy. Now, without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce you to our presenters for today. Hubert Zimmermann is Professor of International Relations at Philipps-University Marburg, Germany. After graduating from the European University Institute in Florence, he has held, among others, positions at Düsseldorf University in Germany, Cornell University, USA, and his current research focuses on international security, global financial and monetary policy, the European Union, in particular its foreign economic and security policies, foreign military intervention, and transatlantic relations. Among his publications are Money and Security for Cambridge University Press, a book comparing EU and US policies and the integration of China to the WTO for the Drachensammlung, a volume on the justification of military intervention for Militarismissionen, Hamburger edition, and the European Union Key Controversies in European Integration for Palgrave. And his latest book, International Relations Theories in Action for Sage, is out later this month, as well as numerous articles in scholarly journals that he's worked on. Alex Burkhardt teaches at the Bundessprachenamt in Koblenz, Germany. He received his PhD in modern history from the University of St. Andrews in 2017 with a thesis on the rise of the Nazis in the Bavarian town of Hof an der Saale. He has published in Central European History, German History, and the Bulletin of German Historical Institute, London, and his monograph, Democrats into Nazis, was published in 2019. He has taught international relations at the Philipps-University Marburg between 2019 and 2021. And I'm delighted to welcome you both today. Over to you.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Hubert Zimmermann, pronouns he, him. And I'm very glad and very thankful for the opportunity to actually be able to present today's book together with Alex Burkhardt, whom you see here and who is the co-author, and Milena Elsinger, who is the second co-author. She unfortunately can't be here, but she sends her greetings. So maybe the first thing to say at the beginning is how we actually came to write this book, or what's the background of the book. So I've been teaching international relations classes for quite a long time, for about 15 years at the University of Marburg. And these were always really huge and really diverse classes. So lots of students, 200 to actually 300 students with very diverse background, on all kinds of different stages in their study. So we had actually always the challenge to actually find a textbook that helped students to actually grasp the content of our course, which was international relations theory. So we weren't really happy with the ones that were on the market. The German ones, anyway, very ponderous, very scientific volumes, and the ones that were in the Anglophone market, often really huge volumes, very expensive also. And also the approach of these textbooks, we thought was a bit overwhelming to students often. So that's actually the basic kind of setup, how we started to write the book at first sight. So it looks fairly conventional. If you look at it, because it starts with the theories, like in most textbooks, and then it goes on to address important topics of international relations, like international security, international political economy, global health, and so on. And so on. Of course, it's also try to make it very much up to date. And I think the novelty in the book is the way how we actually approach the issue, which is very, very students centered and very much centered on like coping with this challenge in actually bringing IR theory across. And there are a couple of challenges. I will soon in the next slide talk about then. I will then speak a little bit about how we can effectively engage students to do IR theory, address the challenges that I outlined, and in the end, I will just a very sketchy example of how you might use the booking class, or how we might use the booking class, using the example of the Russia-Ukraine war. As just an applied issue. Yeah.
Can I briefly interject, Hubert?
Yes.
To introduce myself, my name is Alex Burkhardt, and my preferred pronouns are he and his. And from my perspective, there was a lot of feedback from students who were a bit dissatisfied with excessively theoretical prescribed reading in textbooks and articles. And the appetite for applied examples was considerable. And I would say probably the appetite for applied examples outweighed the interest in the theories as such. And that's where my dissatisfaction, at least with the existing literature, came from, that it didn't foreground the case studies and the examples. It tended to foreground the abstract dimensions of IR theory. And yes. I guess that was a huge motivation for the book, right?
Yeah, and that's actually, yeah, that was the point where we actually regularly were losing the students also.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to avoid
right.
with this book, and help readers and lecturers to actually keep students engaged in the issue, because we think IR theories are really important. So just to move on to some of the typical challenges of teaching IR theory. I mean, the first challenge that I always encounter when I have first or second year students is, and they talk about IR in school, they seem to be used to just like think about international relations as a collection of some kind of exciting stories. You tell those stories, somehow reconstruct them with all kinds of different materials, and then you get the sense of it. But so when they come to my introductory course on international relations, many of them just expect these stories. For example, when I teach American foreign policy or German foreign policy or European Union studies, they think they're gonna learn mostly about policies. They do that, but I always want to encourage them to do that more systematically and more theoretically, and that's often a surprise for them. Some students are also a bit averse to theory because they think, okay, you have with international relations, you have a potentially exciting topic at hand. You see it in the news, you have it on social media, and so on and so on. It's there's wars, there's injustice, there's all kinds of exciting issues, and then the teacher shows up and tortures them with some kind of theories. So that could be some kind of frustration, and the book is also geared towards overcoming this kind of frustration. Another problem that especially recently I think teachers often face is the fact that many students kind of hold very strong kind of normative point of views about certain issues. So they're pretty sure about the values and the judgment about certain policies in the world going on, and we don't want to tell them to get rid of their convictions or something like this. That's not at all our interest. That's a good thing, but the important thing is that they also have a view for other kind of alternative approaches, alternative stances, that they get a chance to actually see the world also in a different ways. So just for example, I last semester I taught a class on American foreign policy, and I had a Turkish student, and we had a session on the Syrian war, American policy towards Syria. And I did this session exclusively focused on sources from the memoirs and testimonies of members of the Obama administration. So we were looking at how these people were juggling their domestic stuff, the fighting with Congress, all kinds of internal considerations going on. And afterwards, after we presented that stuff, the student said me, okay, that's a completely different perspective from what we are used to in our region, because obviously in their region, probably the US looks like this huge monolithic power that pushes its interest in a very determined way, or something like this, and there's not at all this perspective on this internal power struggles that these people are referencing to. So that's an alternative perspective. I don't say that this is the kind of correct way to look at the US, but it's useful for students. It's actually illuminating for students to get to know this perspective. And we try to do that in our applied example systematically. All right. And then another challenge that you might have is also with the kind of texts. Alex already said that. So especially in more recent years, students experience difficulties reading long, complicated texts with a lot of jargon. Something like this, they get deterred by that. And especially if they're starting with their studies, they don't see the use of this jargon as a very useful thing. So you have to get them to think theoretically in the first place before actually before they can actually grasp that, and not start from your kind of perspective as a scholar who's used to certain ways of expressing things, and things that the students should just learn to speak in the same kind of way. And also we wanted the volume to be very slim and concise, so that it's not like a deterrent to students that might be used to much shorter texts. We also have created relatively short chapters with little boxes in there, so they could actually read that very easily, and trying to make text flow well, and so on to overcome this particular challenge. Final challenge is, of course, you always have a lot of students that aren't per se interested in the topic, especially if it has the word theory in it, and especially if you have these kind of huge classes and they just want to get the grade. Nevertheless, by making it as engaging as possible, the material as engaging as possible, we were trying also to catch these students and get their interest for international relations, because we think that it's an absolutely fundamental topic for any student to actually think about. All right. What we wanted and what we did in the first chapter is to explain to students actually why we think theories are still an excellent tool, why we think IR theories are a valuable way of actually getting students to think about international politics. So first, theories are very useful to actually help students create meaningful questions. So lots of students or even ourselves, we find an interesting topic. We think, okay, that sounds very interesting. Let's say some kind of civil war going on and so on. But what's the essence of this problem? What's the real question behind it? What's the fascinating thing behind it? So so we try to get students to actually ask questions, and that's not so easy. Everybody who ever tried to find a good research question for an article or for a book even knows how difficult it is to frame questions. You have a body of material, but you have to kind of what's the meaning of this material, and you have to pose questions to this material. And we think theories are an excellent way to pose questions, to create questions. For example, to use the Syria example again, so we know what the involvement of the US in the region is. If you know your realist or liberal domestic theory, you already have two questions. Is it a geopolitical search for security and influence, or is it some kind of reflection of a domestic debate within the United States? And then you can go on researching this question with appropriate methods. Second thing that's very useful about theories and that we want to teach students is that theories help us to select among diverse classes of evidence and methods of dealing with them. Once we have this kind of focused question, we can also think about, okay, what are the essential actors? And when you have a theory in the background, you have already an instrument to actually think about what the decisive actors might be, and on which kind of material you actually have to concentrate. Of course, if you have several theories in your background, you know that's not the only perspective. That's the all important thing, but it's one perspective how you can look at it, you can research it, and you can substantiate it then. And that's also why you can use theory as a tool. So overall, the whole idea is to kind of to demystify theory for students and make them aware that theories are actually helpful and not some chore that you have to kind of study. And also help them to start think theoretically, because IR theories, I think, are one of the more accessible ways to actually start thinking theoretical. All right. Next thing that theories, of course, do, and that's already inherent in the things that I said before. Obviously, as we use theories as different lenses to look on problems, we can also see that things are not so easy and unambiguous in international politics as it often appears if you look at the little TikTok post or listen to a podcast or have a newspaper commentator explain the world to us. So it shows how ambiguous many international issues actually are, and it helps students to develop a critical eye towards this kind of ambiguity. And finally, so theories, and that's also inherent in what I just said, allow students to move from guessing and judging to understanding. That's often something that's not so easily done, because if you ask students, beginning students, okay, why do you think, let's say, Russia started a war with Ukraine, they will often say, okay, it's pretty clear. They wanted to keep out NATO or something like this. And then you can use theories and say, okay, yeah, we've got different perspectives here that could also come into play, like domestic politics or a certain kind of imperialist, colonialist mindset behind Putin. So, so you're not. It's not enough to just say, okay, this is my gut feeling about the situation, and that's why it's correct. But it also helps, theories help to think like systematically about these issues and help you to understand what's really going on instead of just having a kind of guess. And that's basically our approach, why we think teaching international relations through IR theories is still a very, very useful way of engaging students on these issues, because IR debates, and that's a quote from an article in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia, great resource for everything in IR. IR debates are about the validity of competing sets of potentially overlapping assumptions about or organizing principles of world politics. So let me try to get the slide moving. So the core principles, to sum up, that when we are teaching our introductory courses, and the core principles that lie behind the book is that we try to start where the students are in IR theory instead of where we are. So we try to pick them up from the place where they are and try to move them maybe a little bit towards the place that we are, but not like overwhelm them with jargon or with certain points of views that we want to bring across. Absolutely. So that's kind of the major point, really. We also try to apply everything immediately, so almost every kind of theoretical claim that we're making in the book, every kind of mid-range theory, we try to apply it immediately so that students not just memorize, okay, what are the kind of core ideas of neorealism, and then you just have it in your mind, okay, power, anarchy, and all those kinds of things, but you immediately apply it to a current issue. Describe the issue a little bit and then apply the theory to it and see what the theory does with the issue, how it shapes the understanding of the issue. So we want to ensure that no theoretical claim is presented without really application. That's why the book is called Theory in Action. And then we want to help students to understand that, or understand at least that they have this kind of, that there are these preconceived notions that we all have, but we have to be aware of those notions. And theories are nothing but like lenses to actually look onto these preconceived notions, and they help you to self-reflect on this particular insights. So our beautiful book cover, kudos again to the designer who really did an excellent work. It somehow shows how the different perspectives on looking IR, looking at IR that we were trying to kind of convey. All right.
If I could just briefly interject, yep. I think students often come with this perspective that they want to be able to make sense of the news, right? When they come in the first semester, that's their first basic overriding ambition. And I guess in a sense, you have to disappoint them and show them that there's this selection box of different ways of achieving that goal, right?
Yes, that actually is it. So what I always tell my students is, okay, that it's not your task to actually repeat the news or something like this, or because everybody can read the information on the internet, what happened in Syria, what happened in Ukraine, a timeline, a historical overview or something like this. Everybody can look it up. It's not very interesting. Why did it happen? Why did it happen, and what were the consequences? That's the interesting and fascinating things, and theories point you towards this why.
Yeah,
why
and there are
and how question.
There are competing answers to the question, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the essential things. Okay, so how did we go on practically to engage students? So we became aware, as I said in the beginning, that we needed an accessible IR theory textbook, which really engages introductory level students. We wanted also to make it generally enough to also be useful for large introductory IR courses, not only like specialist classes where people focus on IR all through their studies. And we also wanted to, of course, use teaching material that at least we hope is still known to students of today. Of course, things are dating extremely quickly. I still remember 9/11 as if it were yesterday, but for students today, of course, we have to be aware that's ancient prehistory, and they weren't even born when this happened. So so we're trying to introduce the dramatic new landscape in international relations with COVID-19, Ukraine, also the Middle East situation, although that came very late in the book, so we reference it only very, very briefly, unfortunately. Next edition, maybe. But anyway, that's what we were trying to do with the book being very up to date. Okay, and our main instruments to actually do that are the boxes in the text, and Alex will say a few words about those boxes in the next minute. Where are they? Here we are.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we realized to some extent that we couldn't escape completely from providing an overview of the theory. So an intellectual history of the theory, looking at the key thinkers, the historical context in which they developed their theories, the key principles of the theory. We knew that this more esoteric dimension had to be in there somewhere, but we didn't want to foreground it, partly because of the dissatisfaction of our students with this theory-heavy approach that we mentioned. And we knew that the main impulse behind the book was to foreground this applied dimension of IR theory. So we racked our brains in trying to come up with features that would help us to achieve our main goal of foregrounding the applied dimension. And that's why the chapters, even though they deal with theories, they are peppered with these features, like, for example, theories in action, which I personally found these were the most challenging aspects of the book to write, in my opinion, because it's where we took concrete historical or contemporary case studies and then describe them in some detail, and then at the end of the description pose questions about how particular theories would make sense of these concrete examples, in the hope that the student will read it and then stop and then consider the questions and try to apply the theory, which again is the main rationale of the book. That's covered in the second box as well, the discussion topics. The case studies are always followed by these questions. We also have these IR in the movies or in media. This feature crops up quite a few times in the book, because sometimes movies or series or books or other forms of fiction or semi-fiction or products of the media, they provide graphic examples of particular theories in operation, I would say. In some cases more graphic and more vivid than maybe even than reality. So we thought it was interesting to include some of these movies or TV series, which I sometimes felt explicitly or consciously drew on particular IR theories. The more that I learned about the different theories, the more I felt that the people writing these movies and series must also know about the theories, because it's so blatantly a part of their narrative and their character development and the character motivation at times. There are some examples of that in the book. Finally, we included these info boxes, which look at key terms. And I thought this was particularly important because I came to the study of IR 5 years ago now, I think, with a background in history, with a background in modern history. So initially, a lot of these concepts that I think IR students and academics take for granted, like anarchy in the international system, I first had to, assimilate these concepts for myself. And we don't take for granted that some of these concepts are already apparent to the students, and the key concepts are fleshed out throughout the chapters. So basically, that's how we try to make the theories more concrete and tangible, perhaps, for a student readership.
Yeah. Thanks. And maybe as for the difference between the discussion topics and the theories in action, the discussion topics, let's say, they're more towards the political than the theories. So we've got some boxes, topics where people have to discuss how to solve, or students have to discuss how to solve certain injustice in the world. So like the real political discussions, they already have the theoretical background. They already have like competing explanations as to why this injustice is happening here and there, and then they can also in this discussion topics, it's more focused. They can discuss how to overcome them, how to reform, let's say, the UN Security Council and stuff like this. So it's these topics go more in this kind of political directions that students were maybe expecting from the outset. So we didn't want to disappoint them completely and only discuss about theories. They also can discuss policies, and these are mostly this discussion topics. But it's a bit mixed. There's an overlap between those things. Okay. And how would we go about? So now finally a applied example in the interest of time. It's pretty late, so I'll just do it very briefly. As I said, just looking at the Russian attack on Ukraine, and you can and usually I would, let's say, with the use of the book, I would start students by asking students to just think about why do they think Russia actually has attacked Ukraine, and I would just collect their answers, and some of the answers like are obviously, so I usually, if I ask this question, the kind of realist perspective comes up immediately. So that's the very obvious one that students seem to be drawn to. So they think that's a kind of proxy war between the West and Russia and so on. And they say, okay, it's because Putin just wants to provide a counterweight against Russia. So I list that answer, and then often the liberal domestic perspective also comes up, where they speak about it's a dictatorship, so it's inherently aggressive, and it just wants to export its own or solidify its own regime by being aggressive towards the outside. And some might even come up with the imperialist post-colonial perspective, having been sensitized in the last couple of years to this particular perspective, and might say, okay, this is something that's a country that wants to regain its old empire and reintegrate those regions that they think they have lost. And some might even talk about a common Russian identity that Putin actually refers to in his speeches quite a lot. And once I have these kind of answers and listed them up, there could be other ones also. I mean, you never know what students come up with. I'll ask them how they actually arrived at this kind of hypothesis. Where did they get it from? So most of them will actually say that they got it from the news or so. They read it somewhere. Why Putin has invaded. Some will actually maybe have read a piece of the literature there. And then I probably tell them, okay, there's another way to actually get at those different perspectives and get to see that there are different answers to this why question. And that's theory. And then I will probably tell them to which theory which answer would belong, and if they'd had the theories in the background in the beginning, they could have devised these alternative answers. Obviously, then not each of these perspectives is as true as the other. So then you actually have to prove them. So I would ask them, so okay, if you think that it's the rivalry between great powers that's behind the Ukraine war, how would you go about prove them? And that's makes them think about, okay, the next thing that's is closely linked to that, and that often students have problems bringing together how do I actually prove my point of view. So if I think it's great power rivalry, I probably have to look at the different alliances, at the speeches, at the ways how people actually justify their positions. They look at the sequence of events that's going on. Is there a kind of reaction to the events from the other side, back and forth, and so on and so on. So there's a different material if you look at that, and then if they think about, okay, is it a domestic kind of diversionary war? You have to look at something else. You have to look at domestic policies in Russia. You have to look at protests that might have been happening beforehand in Belarus or in Kazakhstan or other parts. Is it maybe the feeling of the Russian regime feel to be threatened? So that there's a different kind of method that you have to use to prove this kind of point. And that helps people to actually bring together question theory and method, and shows them a way of thinking, let's say, scientifically, which is different from the way of kind of journalistic information collecting and then gut feeling this sounds about right. And that's what we want to achieve with this book, in students, to get away from this impressionistic thinking and get towards a more systematic thinking, and not make it overwhelming to them, and actually make them see that it's useful and interesting and exciting, and that IR, even with theory, can be a really exciting, or is even more exciting topic than if you just speculate about international events, as so many people are doing on the social media. All right, so that's basically our outlook for the book. That's why we write it, why we wrote it, how we actually did it, what the background was, what our how we actually go about, and what the basic philosophy is. So we're very much looking forward to your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Hubert. Thank you very much, Alex, for that very, very interesting and insightful discussion into, all those great ways to engage students. And just want to remind everybody that the Q&A box is there if you want to write any questions for Hubert or for Alex based on, the content of what they discussed today, or anything that you want to ask about, their book that you'd like to know about. Please do write your questions in the chat. And while you're doing that, we'd invited some questions from people who registered earlier on, and I have a couple of those for you, if I may ask you those. But everybody else, please do write your questions in the chat, and we'll come to those shortly too. So the first question is, so this is an interesting one. I had a question from Eleni, who's based in Spain, and Eleni said, Can role games be helpful in teaching theories?
That's actually a very good question. Very interesting question. Actually, I had to think a little bit about that, because role games are mainly, their task is mainly that students put themselves into the mindset of the actors, and they get to know the perspective of the actors and reenact that in a way. But with role games, you have to be careful, as students often tend to assume that the different actors are the kind of carriers of theories. Like the US is realist somehow. Instead of thinking in this way, the US policy can be explained by realism. It should be like this way. And so you have to be careful, I would say. Um, uh, you try to get students to act their roles or to make their simulation, and then afterwards you reflect on it, how they acted, how they played their role, and then ask students, can this specific way of acting be explained by a theory? Did they act somehow in a way that can be explained by, let's say, realism or liberalism or post-colonialism or whatever? So in this way, I think these kind of role games can help students to actually understand theory, but it's always a big danger, and students often make this mistake to identify an actor with a specific theory. So the EU always acts constructivist because it is constructivist, but it isn't. Constructivism might be a good approach, or constructivist approaches might be useful to explain the EU activity, but that doesn't mean that the EU is constructivist.
Actually, my assumption when I read the question was that the role-playing game would entail presenting a concrete problem, maybe a historical situation or a contemporary problem of IR, and then different students role play the perspective of different theories, right? So maybe two students embody liberal domestic theory and two other students embody realist
Also a good
theory.
thing.
And then they and that's where the discussion develops. And I tried that a couple of times and found this role playing, this variant of the role playing game to be much more illuminating and instructive than this first variant where somebody has to play Kennedy and somebody else has to play Khrushchev or whatever. The second version I think is really effective and is in keeping with what we try and do in the book, I would guess, where we invite the students to, you know, put themselves in the shoes of Mearsheimer or Alexander Wendt or something like this. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for speaking to that question. And yes, so many different variations, and I guess reaching and engaging with students in different ways, at least as a way in, is one way to, develop that kind of wider interest in something for them. Another question that came in advance, I'd like to just pose to you, if that's okay. So this one is from Samuel, who's based at Philipps-University Nigeria. And this question is, how better can one relate limitations of IR theories to current issues?
Alex, do you want to talk on that, or should I start? So I guess I start. Yeah, obviously, IR theory is in a constant kind of process of addressing gaps in understanding global issues, and especially in recent years, the discipline has moved away a lot from the kind of very Eurocentric, or let's say Anglophone discipline that it used to be. So there's now lots and lots of different approaches of trying to understand global issues, post-colonialism. We take up all these kind of new approaches, but we also keep the traditional approaches, but because we think that these two perspectives, or all these different perspectives, talk to each other. So that I think the important thing for IR theory is to keep an open mind and not to solidify into kind of some kind of canonical fixed standard that is not moving as while the world is moving very rapidly. So one has to keep an open mind for new kinds of ideas. I think the IR community overall is doing that very well. There are so many journals and so many stuff out there, and our task is not necessarily to kind of make students aware of all these kind of different approaches, which might be, again, really overwhelming to them, but to just put them in a state where they keep an open mind towards all kinds of new approaches that are coming up. So yeah, one has to remain curious, and if our existing theories are unable to explain certain global events, certain global phenomena, then we just have to keep on thinking, reform them, rewrite them, reformulate them, and move on. That's the nature of research. And one thing is to actually make students aware that this is the nature of research, that we never end up with some immutable truth here, but we have to keep on questioning ourselves, the theories, and all the kind of conventional understandings of issues, and that's how we make progress in our research, in our understanding of international relations.
Thank you very much, Hubert, for answering to that. And it's a really good key takeaway to take away there about that open-mindedness and keeping our attitudes open. And there is still a little bit more time, but I don't know if we don't seem to have any more questions. So I think we'll just kind of wrap it up from here. And that just leaves me to finally just kind of say that's all we have time for now. But we don't forget to visit our webpage to find out more about Hubert and Alex's new textbook, International Relations Theories in Action. And to help celebrate our very first Politics Webinar Week, you can buy a copy of the book with a 25% discount using the code POLWebWeek. And if you're a lecturer or module leader, you can request an electronic inspection copy from our webpage. And we'll be sending you an email with a webinar recording link over the coming weeks. So feel free to watch it again or share it with any colleagues who might be interested in the subject. And once again, a huge thank you to Hubert, to Alex for their time today and for the very engaging presentation and discussion. Thank you to Georgina for helping behind the scenes to facilitate the webinar. And a massive thank you to everybody for joining us today.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.